I paid for this house for 10 years and came home to find another man sleeping in my bed. Ethan Cross had survived sandstorms, contract disputes, and loneliness that could break a weaker man. But nothing in Dubai prepared him for what waited inside the home he'd been paying for all along. The door was unlocked. The furniture was different. Upstairs, his wife was laughing, with someone else. And when the stranger in silk pajamas calmly explained that Ethan's marriage had been legally dissolved months ago, the floor dropped out from under him. But it wasn't the betrayal that made his blood run cold. It was the mortgage statement in his hand, marked paid in full, 2 years ago. So where had his money been going every month since? If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a comment with your city below. Now let's begin. The wheels of the taxi crunched over the familiar asphalt of Maplewood Drive, and for the first time in a decade, Ethan Cross felt the strange, almost sacred weight of homecoming. He'd left California in 2014 with a suitcase, a one-way ticket, and a promise to his wife Lauren that the sacrifice would be worth it. Dubai had been brutal, 120-degree heat, 18-hour shifts managing infrastructure projects for a firm that paid well but demanded everything. But he'd done it. Every month, without fail, he'd wired money home. Every video call, he'd reassured her, "We're building something, just a little longer." Now finally, it was over. The taxi slowed in front of 428 Maplewood, and Ethan's chest tightened. The house looked different. The lawn was manicured to magazine cover perfection, the shutters freshly painted a deep charcoal gray he'd never approved. There was a sleek black sedan in the driveway, not Lauren's old Honda. He frowned, but excitement overrode the questions. Maybe she'd finally splurged. Maybe things had gotten better. He paid the driver, shouldered his duffel, and walked up the path he used to know by heart. The key was still in his pocket, warm from 10 hours of travel, but when he reached for the handle, the door swung open at his touch. Unlocked. Ethan stepped inside and froze. The entryway was unrecognizable. Gone was the modest console table where they used to drop their keys. In its place stood a minimalist marble-topped credenza, topped with an abstract bronze sculpture that probably cost more than his first car. The floors were no longer the scuffed hardwood he remembered. They gleamed dark and polished, like something out of an architect's portfolio. To his left, the living room had been gutted and reborn. A sectional sofa in cream leather, a glass coffee table, art on the walls that looked expensive and cold. It felt like walking into a stranger's house. "Lauren?" His voice came out hoarse. No answer. He moved deeper inside, his pulse climbing. The kitchen had been remodeled. White quartz countertops, stainless steel appliances, pendant lights hanging like something from a showroom. A bottle of wine sat open on the island, 2 glasses beside it. One still had lipstick on the rim. Ethan's stomach knotted. From somewhere upstairs he heard it. Laughter, light, easy, intimate. Lauren's laugh. And then a man's voice, low, smooth, familiar in the way that made Ethan's skin crawl. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked to the stairs, each step feeling like a countdown he couldn't stop. His hand gripped the banister, knuckles white, and he climbed. The bedroom door was half open. Ethan pushed it wider. Lauren was there, propped against the headboard in silk pajamas he'd never seen before, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Beside her, stretched out like he owned the place, was a man in his late 30s, tanned, confident, wearing tailored lounge pants and a smirk that didn't falter even when he saw Ethan standing in the doorway. For a long, airless moment, no one moved. Lauren's face drained of color. "Ethan, what the hell is this?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. The man sat up slowly, unbothered, and extended a hand as if they were meeting at a cocktail party. "Grant Mercer, family law attorney. You must be Ethan." Ethan didn't take the hand. He stared at Lauren, his wife of 12 years, and felt the ground beneath him turn to sand. "Lauren, what is he doing in our bed?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked to Grant as if he had the answer. Grant did. He leaned back, utterly calm, and folded his arms. "Ethan, I understand this is jarring, but legally speaking, this isn't your bed anymore. Lauren filed for divorce 18 months ago. The decree was finalized 4 months ago by default judgment. You didn't respond to the service. Ethan felt his heartbeat in his ears. What are you talking about? I never got any. Check your email, Grant said smoothly. Certified digital service. It's all documented. Ethan pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opened his email, and started scrolling. Nothing. Nothing. Then he checked his spam folder. And there they were. 3 emails, all from a law firm in San Jose. Subject lines like RE, dissolution of marriage, final notice, and default judgment pending. Dated over a year ago, buried under hundreds of junk messages he'd never seen because he'd been halfway around the world, working his ass off to keep this house, this life, afloat. His throat closed. You... He looked at Lauren, and his voice cracked. You did this while I was gone? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. You were never here, Ethan. You left. You chose Dubai over me. I chose us. His voice finally broke free, sharp and raw. I worked 70-hour weeks so you wouldn't have to, so we could pay off this house, so we could have a future. And I was alone for 10 years, Lauren shot back, her voice rising. 10 years of waiting, of watching my friends build lives while you sent money and excuses. I sent everything I had. Ethan's hands were shaking now. Every month, every cent. Grant cleared his throat. Actually, Ethan, that brings up an important point. The mortgage on this property was satisfied 24 months ago, paid in full. Ethan's head snapped toward him. What? Grant reached for a folder on the nightstand, because of course he had paperwork ready, and handed Ethan a document. County records. The lien was released in November 2022. The house has been free and clear since then. Ethan stared at the paper. The words blurred. His brain struggled to catch up. But I've been paying the mortgage every month, he said slowly. Automatic transfer, $1,500, every single month. Grant and Lauren exchanged a glance. Where did that money go? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Lauren looked away. Grant stood, buttoning his shirt with the casual ease of someone who'd done this before. That's something you'll need to take up with your bank, Ethan. But as of now, this property is Lauren's sole asset per the divorce settlement. You're welcome to consult your own attorney, but I'd advise you to do so off the premises. Ethan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You want me to leave? The house I paid for. The house she was awarded, Grant corrected. Legally. Ethan turned to Lauren, searching her face for some hint of the woman he'd married. Did you know? About the mortgage being paid off? She didn't answer. Lauren, I didn't ask questions, she whispered. Grant said it was handled. Grant said. Ethan looked at the man who'd stolen his life. And you just trusted him. She trusted someone who was here, Grant said evenly. You can't ghost your own marriage for a decade and expect it to wait. Ethan's fist clenched, but he didn't swing. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But instead he turned and walked out of the room, down the stairs, and out the front door before he did something he couldn't take back. He stood on the lawn, breathing hard, staring at the house that no longer felt like his. And then, slowly, the shock gave way to something colder, something sharper. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, found the mortgage account, clicked on the transaction history. $1,500. Every month. For the last 2 years. But the account name had changed. It wasn't the mortgage company anymore. It was labeled L. Hale, Personal Checking. Ethan's vision tunneled. She hadn't just divorced him. She'd been stealing from him. And Grant Mercer, the smug attorney in silk pajamas, had helped her do it. 2 hours later. Motel 6. Highway 101. Ethan sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, his laptop open, his phone on speaker. Across the line, his site manager in Dubai, Tariq Anwar, listened in stunned silence. You're telling me she took you for 18 months of payments? Tariq finally said. 24, Ethan corrected. 2 full years, $36,000. Tariq swore in Arabic. And the lawyer was in on it? He had to be. The mortgage company sends a payoff letter. Someone had to reroute my payments. And who better than the guy handling the divorce? What are you going to do? Ethan stared at the bank statement on his screen. I'm going to find an attorney. A real one. You need a killer, Habibi. Not some corporate suit. I need someone who doesn't lose. Tariq was quiet for a moment. Then, I know a guy. Miles Okoye, property litigation specialist. He's in San Francisco. Destroyed a developer who tried to scam a dozen homeowners out of their equity. The man doesn't settle. Ethan wrote down the name. Send me his info. Done. And Ethan? Yeah? Burn them. Ethan hung up and stared at the ceiling. For 10 years, he'd been the good guy, the provider, the one who sacrificed. That version of him was gone. Patat. Next morning, law offices of Okoye and Stern, San Francisco. Miles Okoye was not what Ethan expected. The man was 6'4", broad-shouldered, with silver streaks in his close-cropped hair and a voice like gravel wrapped in silk. His office overlooked the bay, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the water like a courtroom backdrop. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a pen and a contract. I don't do divorce, Miles said flatly, leaning back in his chair. But I do fraud. And what you're describing isn't a messy breakup. It's embezzlement with a law degree. Ethan slid the bank statements across the desk. Can you prove it? Miles didn't even look at them. I don't prove things, Mr. Cross. I dismantle people who think they're untouchable. Now, tell me about Grant Mercer. Ethan recounted everything, the emails buried in spam, the paid-off mortgage, the rerouted payments, the smug handshake in his own bedroom. Miles listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the attorney smiled, but it wasn't warm. Grant Mercer, Miles said slowly, runs a boutique family law practice in Palo Alto, high-net-worth divorces. He also owns a side company, Mercer Property Valuations. They do appraisals for divorce settlements. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You think he appraised my house? I don't think, I know. Miles turned his monitor around. On the screen was a public record search. Your property appraisal, filed with the divorce decree, conducted by MPV, valued at $270,000. Ethan's jaw dropped. That house is worth at least $450, maybe $5. Exactly. And in a default judgment, the court doesn't question it. Lauren gets the house at a lowball value, you get nothing, and Mercer walks away with his fee and his new girlfriend's gratitude. So what do we do? Miles leaned forward, his eyes cold and sharp. We pull every county record, every transaction, every email. We subpoena his company's files, and then we walk into court and we take everything. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. How long will this take? Depends on how dirty they are. But Ethan? Miles stood, extending his hand. You need to prepare yourself. When we start digging, we're going to find things, and some of them are going to hurt worse than what you already know. Ethan shook his hand. I don't care. I want the truth. Good, Miles said, because the truth is the only weapon we've got. 1 week later, County Recorder's Office. Miles worked fast. Within days, he'd filed an emergency motion to freeze the property pending review. Within a week, he'd secured a court date. And by the time Ethan met him outside the county office, Miles had a stack of documents thick enough to kill someone. Look at this, Miles said, spreading the papers across the hood of his car. Your mortgage was paid off in November 2022. The payoff came from an account held jointly by Lauren and her mother. 10 days later, Lauren's mother transferred the title solely into Lauren's name. No consideration, no sale. Textbook asset concealment. Ethan stared at the signatures. Her mother helped her? Family protects family. But here's where it gets interesting. Miles pulled out another sheet. After the mortgage was paid, your automatic transfer, set up through your Dubai bank, was never canceled. Instead, the receiving account was updated, not by the mortgage company, by someone with access to your account routing. Grant, or someone he hired. Either way, the money kept flowing into an account Lauren controlled. For 2 years. That's theft. It's fraud, conversion, and possibly conspiracy. And it gets better. Miles handed him a final document, a property appraisal report. This is the valuation Mercer's company submitted. Notice the comparables? All foreclosures or distressed sales, none of them remotely similar to your property. It's a hack job designed to lowball the asset and make the settlement look fair. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Can we prove he knew? We don't have to. He signed it. His company stamped it. That makes him liable. Miles grinned. And when the judge sees that the same attorney who handled the divorce also provided the appraisal, this case is going to implode in the best possible way. Ethan looked at the man who'd become his lifeline. What's next? Next, we go to court, and we make them answer for every lie. 2 weeks later, Superior Court, San Mateo County. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, but the air was thick with tension. Lauren sat beside Grant at the defendant's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked pale, thinner than he remembered, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. Grant, on the other hand, looked perfectly composed, tailored suit, confident posture, a faint smile that said, "This is routine." Miles stood at the plaintiff's table, a leather briefcase at his side, and Ethan beside him, hands clenched. Judge Patricia Nakamura entered, and everyone rose. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for zero tolerance and a docket that didn't suffer fools. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at Miles. Counselor Okoye, you filed an emergency motion to vacate a final divorce decree and freeze transfer of real property. That's a significant ask. Make it count. Miles didn't hesitate. Your Honor, this isn't a divorce dispute. It's a fraud scheme disguised as one. Grant stood smoothly. Objection, inflammatory and unsupported. Judge Nakamura waved him down. I'll decide what's supported, Mr. Mercer. Sit. Grant sat, but his smile didn't falter. Miles approached the bench and handed up a binder. Your Honor, the evidence shows that after the mortgage on the marital property was satisfied in November 2022, my client continued making payments that were diverted into an account controlled solely by Ms. Hale. Over 24 months, $36,000 was taken without disclosure, without consent, and without my client's knowledge. During that same period, Mr. Mercer, Ms. Hale's attorney, and as we now know, romantic partner, provided a property appraisal through his own valuation company that undervalued the home by nearly 40%. The judge's eyebrows rose. You're alleging the attorney appraised his own client's asset? Yes, Your Honor, and submitted that appraisal as evidence in the dissolution proceeding. Judge Nakamura turned to Grant. Is that true? Grant stood again, unruffled. Your Honor, Mercer Property Valuations is a licensed independent entity. The appraisal was conducted in accordance with... Answer the question, Mr. Mercer. Did your company appraise the property in a case where you were counsel of record? A pause. Then, yes. The courtroom went silent. Judge Nakamura leaned back. Continue, Mr. Okoye. Miles smiled. The appraisal used distressed comparables to justify a value of $270,000. Current market analysis puts the property at $460,000. That discrepancy allowed Ms. Hale to retain a valuable asset, while my client, who financed the payoff through his labor abroad, received nothing. Worse, the continued payments were never disclosed in the divorce filings. My client was led to believe he was still paying a mortgage that no longer existed. Judge Nakamura looked at Lauren. Ms. Hale, did you know the mortgage was paid off? Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. And did you know Mr. Cross was still making payments? Silence. Ms. Hale, Lauren's eyes welled. I saw the deposits, but Grant said, what did Mr. Mercer say? He said it was fine, that we'd deal with it after the divorce was final. The judge's expression hardened. She turned to Grant. You advised your client to accept funds she knew were sent in error? Grant's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, I advised her that until the decree was final, the funds were not... Stop talking. Grant stopped. Judge Nakamura removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Mr. Mercer, you're an officer of this court. You know better. And Ms. Hale, you don't get to play ignorant when $36,000 lands in your account. She flipped through the binder, her jaw tightening with every page. Finally, she looked up. I'm vacating the decree pending a full evidentiary hearing. All property transfers are frozen. Miss Hale, you have 72 hours to vacate the premises and secure alternate housing. The property will remain under court supervision until we sort out who actually owns what." She turned to Grant. "And Mr. Mercer, you're damn lucky I don't refer this to the state bar right now. Consider this a warning." Grant's face went white. Lauren covered her mouth, tears spilling over. And Ethan exhaled for the first time in weeks. Outside the courthouse, Miles clapped him on the shoulder as they walked down the courthouse steps. "That's round one, but it's not over. What happens now?" "Now we dig deeper. If Mercer pulled this with you, he's pulled it before. We find the other victims, we build a pattern, and then we bury him." Ethan looked back at the courthouse, where Lauren was being escorted out by her mother, and Grant was on his phone, pacing like a caged animal. "I don't want revenge," Ethan said quietly. "I just want what's mine." Miles stopped and looked at him. "Then we'll get it. Every cent, every inch, every lie." Ethan nodded, and for the first time since stepping into that house, he felt like himself again. Not the man who got blindsided, the man who fights back. The 72 hours felt like 72 years. Ethan spent the first night back in the motel, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the courtroom in his mind. Judge Nakamura's voice, Lauren's tears, Grant's face when the gavel came down. It should have felt like victory, but all he felt was hollow. Miles had warned him that winning in court was only the beginning, that the real fight would come when they started pulling on threads to see what unraveled. He didn't have to wait long. On the second day, Miles called him at 6 in the morning. "We've got something," Miles said, his voice sharp with focus. "Meet me at the office in an hour. And Ethan, bring coffee, strong coffee." When Ethan arrived, Miles was already surrounded by file boxes, his desk buried under printouts, highlighted documents, and sticky notes that formed a web of connections only he seemed to understand. He looked up when Ethan entered, his eyes bloodshot but burning with intensity. "You're not going to believe this," Miles said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." Ethan sat, handing over a cup of black coffee. "What did you find?" Miles pulled a document from the top of the nearest stack. "I started running searches on Mercer property valuations. Wanted to see how many divorce cases Grant's been involved in where his company also did the appraisal. You know what I found?" "How many?" 47. Ethan's stomach dropped. 47 cases? Over the last 8 years, 47 divorces where Grant Mercer represented one party and Mercer Property Valuations provided the asset valuation. And here's the kicker. In 43 of those cases, the appraisal came in significantly below market value. We're talking 30, 40, sometimes 50% under. Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. He's been doing this for years. Not just doing it, perfecting it. Miles spread out a series of documents, each one a different case file. Look at the pattern. High net worth divorces. One spouse is out of state or out of the country. Limited ability to contest. Default judgments. Clean, fast, and the attorney walks away with his fee while his client gets a massively undervalued asset that they can later sell at market rate and pocket the difference. That's fraud on a massive scale. It's a goddamn assembly line. Miles tapped one file in particular. This one caught my attention. Marianne Chen, 2019. Her husband was deployed overseas, Navy. She filed for divorce, Grant represented her. MPV appraised their home in Menlo Park at $320,000. It sold 6 months later for $610,000. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. She made almost $300,000 off a rigged appraisal. And Grant took his cut. But here's the thing, Ethan. Some of these people didn't know. Some of them, like Lauren, just trusted their attorney and didn't ask questions. But others? Miles pulled out another file. Others were in on it, and I think we can prove it. How? Miles opened his laptop and turned it toward Ethan. On the screen was an email thread, the subject line reading, Property Valuation, Final Draft. This came from a subpoena I filed yesterday. It's correspondence between Grant and one of his appraisers, a guy named Joel Pritchard. Read the date. Ethan scanned the email. It was from 3 years ago, attached to a case file for a divorce in Palo Alto. The message was short, clinical, and damning. Joel, need the Harris property to come in under 400. Use the foreclosure comps on Elm and the distressed sale on Maple. Client needs liquidity post-settlement. GM Ethan's hands went cold. He's telling the appraiser what number to hit. And the appraiser's doing it. That's not a valuation. That's a hit job. Miles closed the laptop. If we can prove this was standard practice, we don't just have your case, we have a racketeering case. And every single one of those 47 divorces becomes evidence. Ethan sat back, his mind racing. What do we do? We find the victims. We contact them. And we get them to talk, Sam. It took Miles 3 days to compile a list. 47 names. 47 people who'd gone through divorces where Grant Mercer had been involved and Mercer Property Valuations had appraised the assets. Some had settled amicably. Some had fought bitterly. But all of them had one thing in common. They trusted the process. Miles handed Ethan a subset of the list, 12 names, all within driving distance. These are the ones I think will talk, Miles said. People who got screwed and might not even know it yet. Start with Marianne Chen. She's local, and her case is one of the cleanest examples of the scam. Ethan stared at the name. You want me to just show up and tell her she was defrauded? No. I want you to show up and tell her she's not alone. That what happened to her happened to you. People don't trust lawyers, Ethan, but they'll trust someone who's been through the same hell. Ethan folded the list and put it in his jacket. What if they don't want to hear it? Then we move on to the next one. But my gut says they will. Because nobody likes being played. Marianne Chen lived in a modest townhouse in Redwood City, a far cry from the Menlo Park property she'd lost in the divorce. Ethan stood on her doorstep for a full minute before he knocked, rehearsing what he'd say and discarding every version as inadequate. Finally, he knocked. The woman who answered was in her early 40s, petite, with tired eyes, and a wariness that came from years of disappointment. She looked at Ethan like he was selling something she didn't want. Can I help you? Ms. Chen? My name is Ethan Cross. I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to talk to you about your divorce. Her expression hardened. I don't know who you are, but Grant Mercer represented you, Ethan said quickly, and Mercer Property Valuations appraised your house in Menlo Park. Is that right? Marianne's hand tightened on the door. How do you know that? Because the same thing happened to me. She stared at him, and for a moment Ethan thought she'd slam the door in his face. But then something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, maybe? Or just exhaustion. You better come in, she said. Marianne's living room was small and neat, the furniture functional but worn. She made tea, neither of them drank, and sat across from Ethan with her arms crossed, her posture defensive. Talk, she said. Ethan told her everything, the decade in Dubai, the paid-off mortgage, the diverted payments, the low-ball appraisal, the courtroom confrontation. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to make himself sound noble. He just told her the truth. When he finished, Marianne was quiet for a long time. Then she laughed, bitter and sharp. 320,000, she said. That's what they told me my house was worth. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? Grant said the market was soft, that I was lucky to get what I did in the settlement, and I needed out. My ex was... She stopped, her jaw tightening. He was overseas. I was alone. I just wanted it to be over. When did you sell the house? 6 months later. The buyer paid $610. Ethan's chest tightened. Did Grant know you were selling? He encouraged it, said it was a good time to liquidate, that I could start fresh. Marianne's voice dropped. He even recommended the real estate agent. Did you ever think it was strange that the appraisal was so far off? I thought I got lucky. I thought the market turned. She looked at Ethan, her eyes shining. I thought I was smart. You weren't stupid, Ms. Chen. You were lied to. And what am I supposed to do about it now? It's been 5 years. Ethan leaned forward. You can help us prove he's been doing this to other people. You can make sure he doesn't do it again. Marianne shook her head. I can't afford another lawyer. I can't afford another fight. You don't have to. My attorney is building a case. If you're willing to testify about what happened, about what Grant told you, about the appraisal, about the sale, it helps everyone, including you. She looked at him for a long time, and Ethan could see the war happening behind her eyes. The fear of reopening old wounds, the anger at being used, the exhaustion of just wanting to move on. Finally, she spoke. I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Ethan left his number and walked back to his car, feeling like he'd just run a marathon. Miles called him an hour later. How'd it go? She's thinking about it. Good. That's better than a door in your face. Who's next? Ethan looked at the list. David Kwan, Los Gatos, divorced in 2020. Go. David Kwan didn't need convincing. The man opened the door, saw Ethan's face, and said, You're here about Grant Mercer, aren't you? Ethan blinked. How did you? Because I've been waiting for someone to knock on this door for 3 years. David stepped aside. Get in here. David Kwan was a software engineer, methodical and precise, and he'd kept everything. Bank statements, emails, appraisal reports, contracts. He spread them across his dining room table like evidence in a war room. I knew something was wrong the day the appraisal came back, David said, his voice tight with controlled fury. My house in Los Gatos, 4-bed, 3-bath, updated kitchen, walking distance to downtown, appraised at $470,000. I checked the comps myself. Everything around me was selling for $650, $700. I told Grant. You know what he said? What? He said the appraisal was conservative, that it was better to undervalue in a divorce so there wouldn't be disputes. He said I'd make it up when I sold. David's laugh was hollow. And I did. Sold it for $720 a year later. But by then, my ex-wife had already walked away with half of $470, not half of $720. I got screwed out of $125,000, and Grant pocketed his fee like it was all perfectly legal. Ethan felt his anger rising. Did you ever confront him? I tried. He said I had no grounds for a malpractice claim because I'd signed off on the appraisal. Said if I pursued it, I'd be throwing good money after bad. David's jaw clenched. So I let it go. But I never forgot. Would you testify? David didn't hesitate. Damn right I would. Yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Miles worked through the list. Some people slammed doors. Some didn't want to relive the pain. But others, more than Ethan expected, listened. And once they heard they weren't alone, once they realized the pattern, they got angry. Angry enough to fight. By the end of the month, Miles had affidavits from 9 people. 9 victims spanning 8 years, all with the same story. Grant Mercer had represented them or their spouses. Mercer Property Valuations had undervalued the marital home, and the settlement had been based on fraudulent numbers. Miles filed a motion to consolidate the cases and submitted the affidavits as evidence of a systematic scheme. The court scheduled a hearing, and this time, Grant Mercer didn't look so confident. The courtroom was packed. Ethan sat in the front row, flanked by Marianne Chen and David Kwan. Behind them sat 4 more victims, all of whom had flown in to watch. Miles stood at the plaintiff's table, his briefcase open, his expression calm and predatory. Grant sat across from him with a new attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Claudia Reyes, who specialized in defending white-collar cases. She looked expensive and she looked serious. Judge Nakamura entered, and the room stood. She didn't waste time. Mr. Okoye, you've submitted a mountain of evidence alleging a pattern of fraudulent appraisals conducted by Mr. Mercer's valuation company in conjunction with his family law practice. You have 30 minutes to convince me this isn't a fishing expedition. Miles stood. Your Honor, this isn't a fishing expedition. It's a smoking gun factory. He approached the bench with a binder the size of a phone book. Over the last 8 years, Mercer Property Valuations has appraised assets in 47 divorce cases where Grant Mercer served as counsel. In 43 of those cases, the appraised value came in 30 to 50% below market. In at least 12 cases, the properties sold within 18 months at values that proved the appraisals were knowingly false. Claudia Reyes stood. Your Honor, market fluctuations— I'm not finished, Miles said smoothly. We've also obtained internal emails from Mr. Mercer to his appraisers instructing them to target specific valuations using distressed comparables. This isn't market fluctuation, it's manipulation. Judge Nakamura flipped through the binder, her expression darkening with every page. Miles continued. We have 9 affidavits from individuals who were directly harmed. These are people who trusted Mr. Mercer to represent their interests, only to discover years later that they were victims of a scheme designed to enrich him and his clients at the expense of equitable settlements. The judge looked up. Ms. Reyes, response? Claudia stood, her voice measured. Your Honor, my client vehemently denies any intentional wrongdoing. Appraisals are subjective. Markets are volatile. The fact that some properties later sold for higher values does not prove fraud. It proves that real estate is unpredictable. Then explain the emails, Judge Nakamura said. Claudia hesitated. I haven't had the opportunity to fully review. Then get the opportunity. This hearing is continued for 2 weeks. Mr. Mercer, you're to produce all records from Mercer Property Valuations related to the cases listed in Mr. Okoye's motion. All emails, all appraisals, all correspondence, and if I find out you've destroyed or concealed anything, I will personally refer you to the State Bar and the District Attorney. She looked at Grant, who was pale and rigid. Do I make myself clear? Grant nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Nakamura stood. 2 weeks. Don't make me regret giving you the chance to cooperate. Outside the courthouse, Marianne Chen grabbed Ethan's arm. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't think anyone would care. People care, Ethan said. They just needed someone to start asking questions. David Kwan shook Miles's hand. What happens now? Miles adjusted his tie, his expression grim but satisfied. Now we wait. And if Mercer's smart, he'll settle before this goes any further. Because if it does, he's not just losing his license. He's looking at criminal charges. Ethan watched Grant and Claudia walk to their car, heads down, moving quickly. For the first time, Grant Mercer looked like what he was. Afraid. 2 days later, Ethan got a call he didn't expect. It was Lauren. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Ethan. Her voice was small, shaky. Can we talk, please? He closed his eyes. I don't think that's a good idea. I know you hate me, but I need to tell you something about Grant. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What about him? He's been lying to me too. They met at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, neutral ground, public enough that neither of them could make a scene. Lauren looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around a cup of tea she didn't drink. Ethan sat across from her and waited. I didn't know, Lauren said finally. About the mortgage, about the payments. I swear, Ethan, I didn't know. You saw the money coming in. I did. But Grant told me it was from the escrow account being reconciled. He said it happened all the time in divorces, that the banks took a while to sort things out. I believed him. You believed him because it was easier than asking questions. Lauren flinched, but she didn't argue. You're right. I didn't want to look too hard because I didn't want to feel guilty. I wanted the house. I wanted to be done. And Grant made it easy. He made it profitable. For both of us, Lauren admitted, her voice breaking. But I didn't know how, Ethan. I swear I didn't know he was doing this to other people. Not until I saw the news. Ethan's eyebrows rose. The news? Lauren pulled out her phone and showed him an article. The headline read, Palo Alto attorney faces fraud allegations in divorce scheme. Ethan scanned the article. It was brief, clinical, but it named Grant and referenced the ongoing investigation. When I saw that, Lauren said, I started going through our files, the emails, the appraisal, the settlement, and I realized I was just another mark. He used me to get the house, and he's been using me ever since. What do you mean? Lauren's eyes filled with tears. He's been living in my house, Ethan, rent-free. He convinced me it made sense while the divorce was being finalized, that it was temporary. But it's been 2 years, and when I asked him when he was going to move out, he said he couldn't, because if he did, it would look bad, like he was abandoning me. Ethan felt a cold, bitter satisfaction. He's been playing you the whole time. I know. She wiped her eyes. And I deserve it. But Ethan, I'm telling you this because I want to help. I have emails. I have records. If you need them for the case, they're yours. Ethan studied her. Why? Because you were right about all of it, and because I'm tired of being his accomplice. He didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he took the records. Miles nearly kissed Lauren when Ethan handed over the emails. "This is gold," Miles said, scrolling through message after message. "Look at this. Grant telling her not to cash out the house too fast because it would raise questions. Grant advising her to keep the deposits quiet. Grant promising her they'd work out the details after everything's settled. Is it enough? It's more than enough. This proves intent. This proves he knew exactly what he was doing." Miles looked up, his eyes sharp. "Ethan, we don't just have him on fraud anymore. We have him on conspiracy. And if Lauren's willing to testify—" "She is," Miles grinned. "Then Grant Mercer is done." USA. The final hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, the case exploded. Local news picked it up. Legal blogs dissected it. The state bar opened a formal investigation. And one by one, more victims came forward. People who hadn't been on the original list, people who'd seen the coverage, and realized they'd been scammed too. By the time the hearing arrived, Miles had affidavits from 17 people. The courtroom was standing room only. Grant sat at the defense table, no longer smug, no longer composed. He looked thin, gray, like a man who'd aged a decade in a month. Lauren sat in the gallery, her hands folded, her face pale. And Ethan sat beside Miles, ready to watch the man who'd stolen his life finally answer for it. Judge Nakamura took the bench, and the room fell silent. "We're here," she said, "to determine whether there is sufficient cause to vacate multiple divorce decrees and refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Mr. Okoye, you may proceed." Miles stood, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, clear, and devastating. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Grant Mercer didn't just bend the rules. He broke them. Repeatedly. Systematically. And he did it because he thought no one would ever check. He was wrong." Miles walked to the center of the courtroom like a man who'd waited his entire career for this moment. He carried no notes. He didn't need them. Every fact, every date, every victim was seared into his memory. He turned to face Judge Nakamura, his posture relaxed but his voice carrying the weight of iron. "Your Honor, over the past month, we've uncovered a scheme so brazen, so methodical, that it's almost impressive in its audacity. Grant Mercer didn't stumble into fraud. He engineered it. He built a machine designed to extract wealth from vulnerable people during the most painful moments of their lives, and he did it with a smile and a law degree." Claudia Reyes started to rise, but Judge Nakamura held up a hand. "Let him finish." Miles continued. "The evidence shows that between 2016 and 2024, Mr. Mercer represented clients in 47 divorce cases. In 43 of those cases, his company, Mercer Property Valuations, provided appraisals that undervalued marital assets by an average of 38%. Those appraisals were then used to negotiate settlements that heavily favored his clients, who in many cases went on to sell those same properties at or above market value within months of the divorce being finalized. He walked to the evidence table and picked up a stack of documents. "We have emails showing Mr. Mercer instructing his appraisers to use distressed comparables to justify lowball valuations. We have testimony from 9 victims who were directly harmed, and we have financial records showing that in at least 6 cases, Mr. Mercer received bonuses or referral fees tied to the sale of properties he'd helped undervalue." The courtroom murmured. Judge Nakamura's expression was stone. "But the most damning evidence," Miles said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "comes from Mr. Mercer's own romantic partner, Lauren Hale. Ms. Hale has provided emails in which Mr. Mercer explicitly advised her to continue accepting payments from her ex-husband even after the mortgage had been satisfied, to avoid raising questions until the divorce was finalized. He told her the money was theirs to manage and that any disclosure could complicate the settlement." Miles turned and locked eyes with Grant. "That's not legal advice, Your Honor. That's conspiracy to commit fraud." Grant's attorney shot to her feet. "Your Honor, those emails are being taken out of context." "Then provide the context, Ms. Reyes," Judge Nakamura said coldly. "Because right now, it looks like your client was running a criminal enterprise out of his law office." Claudia hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ethan saw the whole case tilt. She had nothing. Miles pressed forward. Your Honor, we're not just asking for the divorce decrees to be vacated. We're asking this court to freeze all assets held by Grant Mercer and Mercer Property Valuations pending a full forensic audit. We're asking for restitution to be ordered for every victim we've identified, and we're asking that this matter be referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Judge Nakamura leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. Mr. Mercer, stand up. Grant rose slowly, his face ashen. Do you have anything to say before I make my ruling? Grant opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Claudia touched his arm and whispered something urgent, but he shook his head. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, barely audible. I made mistakes, Your Honor, but I never intended— Stop! Judge Nakamura's voice cut like a blade. I don't want to hear about your intentions. I want to hear about your actions. And your actions, Mr. Mercer, speak for themselves. She looked down at the documents in front of her, and the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Finally, she spoke. I am granting the motion to vacate the divorce decrees in all cases identified by the plaintiff. I am freezing all assets held by Grant Mercer and Mercer Property Valuations pending a full financial review. I am ordering Mr. Mercer to produce a complete accounting of all fees, commissions, and payments received in connection with the 47 cases in question. And I am referring this matter to the San Mateo County District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential criminal charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and theft by false pretenses. The courtroom erupted. Grant collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Claudia was already packing her briefcase, her face tight with fury. And Ethan. Ethan felt the knot in his chest that had been there for months finally loosen. Judge Nakamura wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order prohibiting Mr. Mercer from practicing law in the state of California pending the outcome of the state bar investigation. And Ms. Hale, you are ordered to vacate the property at 428 Maplewood Drive within 72 hours and surrender all keys and access. The property is to be held in trust pending final resolution of Mr. Cross's claim. Lauren didn't react. She just sat there staring at her hands. Judge Nakamura banged her gavel. We're adjourned. The room exploded into motion. Reporters rushing for the doors, victims hugging each other, attorneys shouting into phones. But Ethan just sat there, numb, trying to process what had just happened. Miles clapped him on the shoulder. We did it. Ethan looked at him. It's really over? This part is. But Ethan, you need to prepare yourself. The DA is going to open a criminal case. That's going to take months, maybe years. And Grant's not going to go down without burning everything around him first. I don't care, as long as he goes down. Miles smiled. Oh, he's going down. The only question now is how many people he takes with him. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within 48 hours, the state bar suspended Grant's license pending investigation. Within a week, the DA's office announced a grand jury probe into Mercer Property Valuations and launched a hotline for potential victims to come forward. Within 2 weeks, that hotline had logged over 60 calls. Ethan watched it unfold from the sidelines, almost surreal in its speed. He'd gone from a man blindsided in his own bedroom to the centerpiece of a case that was dismantling an entire operation. News outlets called him for interviews. Lawyers reached out offering to represent other victims. And every few days, Miles would call with another update. Another victim identified, another email uncovered, another crack in Grant's facade. But the strangest part was the silence from Lauren. She'd vacated the house on time, leaving the keys in the mailbox and taking only what was legally hers. No note. No apology beyond what she'd already given. Just gone. Ethan walked through the house alone the day after she left, and it felt like touring a museum of someone else's life. The luxury furniture was still there. Grant's doing, Ethan assumed. The artwork. The polished floors. None of it felt like home. He hired a crew to haul it all out. Within a week, the house was empty. Bare walls, scuffed floors, echoes. It looked like the house he'd left a decade ago. And for the first time, Ethan felt like he could breathe in it. Miles called him on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the hearing. We've got a problem, Miles said, his voice tight. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? The kind that could blow up the whole case. Meet me at the office. Now. When Ethan arrived, Miles was pacing, his usual calm replaced by barely controlled agitation. He tossed a folder onto the desk. Read it. Ethan opened the folder and found a series of emails, printed and highlighted in angry yellow streaks. They were correspondence between Grant Mercer and someone named Victor Arnault, dated over the last 6 months. The subject line read, Cross Case, Containment Protocol. Ethan's blood went cold. He read the first email. Victor, cross situation is escalating. Okoye has filed consolidation motion. Need you to scrub the server logs and backdate the notification emails to show earlier delivery. If this goes to discovery, we can't have gaps in the timeline. GM. The response came 2 hours later. Done. Logs show delivery May 2023. Notification trail is clean, but Grant, if they dig deeper, this won't hold. You need to settle before it gets there. VA. Ethan looked up, his hands shaking. Who the hell is Victor Arnault? IT contractor, Miles said grimly. Grant hired him to manage the email systems for his firm, and apparently to forge evidence. They faked the notification emails? Not faked, backdated. They created a paper trail to make it look like you were properly served, even though the emails were sent months after the fact and buried in your spam folder on purpose. Ethan felt his vision tunnel. How do we prove it? We already have. Your buddy in Dubai, Tariq, right? He's an IT specialist. I had him run a forensic analysis on your email server. The metadata doesn't match. The emails Grant's lawyer submitted as evidence show a send date of May 2023, but the server logs show they were actually sent in November 2023, 6 months later. Someone went in and manually altered the timestamps. Ethan's voice came out strangled. That's not just fraud. That's obstruction of justice. And it's a felony, which means Grant doesn't just lose his law license. He goes to prison. Ethan sat down hard. Does the DA know? They do now. I forwarded everything this morning. They're adding it to the grand jury investigation. Ethan stared at the emails, his mind reeling. Why would he do this? He had to know it would come out eventually. Miles leaned against the desk, his expression dark. Because guys like Grant always think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they can control the narrative, bury the evidence, and walk away clean. And most of the time, they do. But not this time. What happens now? Now we wait for the DA to move. But Ethan, you need to be ready. When this goes public, it's going to get ugly. Grant's going to fight. He's going to name names, point fingers, try to drag down everyone around him to save himself. And that includes Lauren. Ethan's jaw tightened. She cooperated. She gave us the emails. And that'll help her. But she still took the money. She still benefited from the fraud. The DA is going to want to know how much she knew and when she knew it. She didn't know, not at first. Maybe, but proving that is her problem, not ours. Ethan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Grant Mercer was probably sitting in his office, surrounded by lawyers, trying to figure out how to spin his way out of a prison sentence. Somewhere out there, Lauren was living with the consequences of trusting the wrong man. And somewhere out there, 17 other people were finally getting justice. I want to be there, Ethan said quietly, when they arrest him. Miles raised an eyebrow. That's not how it works. I don't care. I need to see it. Miles studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I'll make some calls. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, and Miles kept his word. Ethan sat in an unmarked car across the street from Grant's office, watching through tinted windows as 2 plainclothes detectives and a uniformed officer entered the building. Miles sat beside him, silent, his arms crossed. You sure you want to see this? Miles asked. I'm sure. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the doors opened, and Grant Mercer walked out in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The tailored suit was still immaculate, but the man inside it was broken. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and when the cameras from a waiting news crew flashed in his face, he didn't even try to hide. The detective guided him into the back of the squad car and the door slammed shut. Ethan watched the car pull away, and he felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, hollow relief. "How do you feel?" Miles asked. Ethan thought about it. "Empty. That's normal. Revenge doesn't fill the hole. It just stops the bleeding." "Then what does fill it?" Miles looked at him. "Rebuilding. Moving forward. Becoming something better than the thing that broke you." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I'm ready for that." The grand jury indicted Grant Mercer on 14 counts 3 weeks later: conspiracy to commit fraud, theft by false pretenses, obstruction of justice, forgery. The list went on, each charge carrying years of potential prison time. Bail was set at $500,000, which Grant's family posted, but the conditions were strict: no contact with victims, no travel outside the county, and mandatory surrender of his passport. The case became a media firestorm. Legal analysts dissected it on cable news. Victim advocacy groups used it as a rallying cry for stronger oversight of family law attorneys. And one by one, more people came forward, not just from Grant's cases, but from other attorneys who'd used similar tactics. The whole system was starting to crack. Ethan gave one interview to a local reporter who promised to focus on the victims rather than the spectacle. He talked about the decade he'd spent working in Dubai, believing he was building a future. He talked about the moment he'd walked into his own house and found a stranger in his bed. And he talked about the choice he'd made: not to walk away, but to fight. The interview aired on a Sunday evening, and by Monday morning, Ethan's phone was flooded with messages. Some from strangers offering support, some from other victims asking for help, and one from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't open it, but he did. It was from Lauren. "I saw the interview. You were right about everything. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know that I'm testifying against Grant. Whatever it takes. I owe you that much. L." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he deleted it. Not out of anger, not out of spite, just because some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 months later, and by then the DA's case had grown into something massive. 17 victims, over 40 fraudulent appraisals, hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen assets, and the smoking gun, the forged emails that proved Grant had knowingly obstructed justice. Ethan sat in the gallery with Marianne Chen, David Kwan, and a dozen other victims as the prosecutor laid out the case in meticulous, devastating detail. Grant sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 attorneys now, his face a mask of forced composure. But when Lauren took the stand, that mask cracked. She walked to the witness box slowly, her hands trembling, and when she was sworn in, her voice was barely audible. The prosecutor was gentle but firm. "Ms. Hale, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "We were involved romantically for about 2 years. "And during that time, did Mr. Mercer provide you with legal advice regarding your divorce from Ethan Cross?" "Yes." "Did he ever discuss the appraisal of your marital home?" Lauren's eyes flicked to Grant, then away. "Yes. He told me the appraisal was conservative, that it was standard practice in divorces." "Did you ever question the valuation?" "No, I trusted him." "Did Mr. Mercer ever advise you to continue accepting payments from Mr. Cross after the mortgage had been satisfied?" Lauren's voice broke. "Yes." "What did he tell you?" "He said the payments were part of the settlement process, that they'd be reconciled after the divorce was final. He said not to worry about it." "Did he ever tell you those payments were fraudulent?" "No." "Did you know they were fraudulent?" Lauren closed her eyes. "Not at first, but later. I should have known. I should have asked questions." The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Hale. No further questions." Grant's attorney stood for cross-examination, and her first question was a scalpel. "Ms. Hale, you received over $36,000 from Mr. Cross while knowing the mortgage had been paid off, correct?" "I didn't know at the time, but you found out later, and you didn't return the money, did you?" Lauren's face crumpled. "No." You kept it because it benefited you. I was wrong. I know that now. But you didn't know it then, which means you were complicit. Objection, the prosecutor said, badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said. Move on, counselor. But the damage was done. When Lauren stepped down, she looked like she'd aged 10 years. Ethan felt a flicker of something. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction. Just a recognition that some mistakes cost more than money. They cost everything. Well, the hearing lasted 3 days, and by the end, the judge had heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, I find probable cause to believe that the defendant committed the crimes charged. This case will proceed to trial. Grant's face went blank. The courtroom emptied slowly, victims and reporters spilling into the hallway. Ethan lingered, watching as Grant was led out by his attorneys, his head down, his shoulders slumped. Miles appeared at Ethan's side. You good? Yeah, I think I am. This is going to take a while. Trials like this can drag on for a year, maybe more. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. Miles smiled. Good, because we're not done yet. What do you mean? Restitution. We're going after every dollar he took, every fee he collected, every asset he hid. And when we're finished, Grant Mercer isn't just going to lose his freedom. He's going to lose everything. Ethan looked at the empty courtroom, the place where his life had been dissected and reassembled, and he felt something shift inside him. Not closure, not yet, but the beginning of it. Let's finish this, he said. And they did. The trial began on a cold morning in March, nearly 8 months after Ethan had first walked into his own house and found his life dismantled. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and a small but determined group of victims who'd flown in from across the state to watch justice unfold. Ethan stood among them, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, watching the media circus with a detached sense of surrealism. Miles appeared at his elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Ethan without a word. You ready for this? Miles asked. Ethan took a sip, the bitter heat grounding him. I've been ready for months. It's going to be ugly. Grant's team is going to try to paint you as vindictive, Lauren as a victim, and the whole thing is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Let them try. Miles smiled grimly. That's the spirit. They walked inside together, through security and metal detectors, down hallways that smelled of floor wax and old wood. The courtroom was larger than the one where the preliminary hearings had been held, with high ceilings and rows of polished benches that were already filling with spectators. Ethan took his seat in the second row, directly behind the prosecution table, where Deputy District Attorney Karen Phelps was arranging stacks of binders with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Karen was in her mid-40s, sharp-featured and sharper-minded, with a reputation for eviscerating white-collar criminals. She'd reached out to Miles weeks ago, asking for full cooperation, and Miles had delivered everything: documents, testimony, witnesses, the whole arsenal. Now she was ready to deploy it. Grant Mercer entered through a side door, flanked by his defense team, Claudia Reyes and a second attorney, an older man named Arnold Fisk, who specialized in high-profile criminal cases. Grant looked thinner than he had at the preliminary hearing, his suit hanging loose on his frame, his face pale and drawn. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at anyone. The bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Raymond Ortiz took the bench. He was a no-nonsense jurist with 30 years on the bench and a zero-tolerance policy for theatrics. He scanned the courtroom with the weary eyes of a man who'd seen every trick in the book, then nodded to the prosecutor. Ms. Phelps, opening statement. Karen stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked to the jury box. She didn't use notes. She didn't need them. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust. It's about a man who was given power, the power to guide people through one of the most painful moments of their lives, and who weaponized that power for profit. Grant Mercer is a licensed attorney. He took an oath to uphold the law, to represent his clients zealously and ethically, but instead, he built a machine designed to defraud his clients' spouses, to manipulate the legal system, and to enrich himself and the people he chose to protect. She paced slowly, her voice calm but relentless. The evidence will show that over 8 years, Mr. Mercer orchestrated a scheme involving fraudulent property appraisals, concealed financial transfers, and the deliberate obstruction of justice. He used his position of trust to undervalue marital assets, ensuring his clients received favorable settlements while their spouses were left with pennies on the dollar. And when one of those spouses, Ethan Cross, came home after a decade of hard work and discovered the truth, Mr. Mercer didn't just fight back. He tried to cover it up. He forged evidence. He manipulated digital records. And he continued to profit from his crimes even as the walls closed in. She stopped in front of the jury, her gaze moving from face to face. You're going to hear from 17 victims. You're going to see emails, financial records, and expert testimony that prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Grant Mercer is guilty of conspiracy, fraud, theft, and obstruction of justice. And when you've heard all the evidence, I'm confident you'll do what the law requires. You'll hold him accountable. She sat down, and the courtroom was silent. Arnold Fisk rose for the defense, and his approach was exactly what Miles had predicted: sympathy, misdirection, and the soft sell. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is not a criminal. He's a man who made mistakes, who trusted the wrong people, who found himself caught in a system that punishes success and rewards accusation. Yes, Grant Mercer represented clients in divorce cases. Yes, his company provided appraisals. But that doesn't make him a mastermind. It makes him a professional doing his job in a complex, often ambiguous area of law. Fisk walked toward the jury, his tone avuncular, almost apologetic. The prosecution wants you to believe that Grant orchestrated some grand conspiracy, but the truth is simpler and sadder. Grant fell in love with a client. He made decisions based on emotion, not calculation. And when things fell apart, people who were angry, people like Ethan Cross, decided to turn a personal grievance into a criminal case. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't react. Miles placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent reminder to stay calm. You're going to hear a lot of testimony, Fisk continued, a lot of numbers, a lot of technical jargon. But at the end of the day, ask yourselves this: did Grant Mercer set out to hurt people? Or did he make mistakes that got twisted into something they were never meant to be? He sat down, and Judge Ortiz looked at the prosecution. Call your first witness. Karen stood. The people call Ethan Cross. Ethan's heart kicked into overdrive. He'd known this was coming, had prepared for it with Miles and Karen for hours. But walking to the witness stand, raising his right hand, swearing to tell the truth, it all felt surreal, like stepping into a role he'd never auditioned for. Karen approached with a gentle smile. Mr. Cross, can you tell the jury where you were between 2014 and 2024? I was in Dubai, working as a project manager for an infrastructure firm. And during that time, were you married? Yes, to Lauren Hale. Did you maintain the mortgage on your home in California while you were abroad? I did. I set up an automatic transfer from my account in Dubai, $1,500 a month. And did you believe that money was going toward the mortgage? Yes. I had no reason to think otherwise. Karen pulled up a document on the screen behind her, a bank statement. Can you identify this? Ethan studied it. That's my account statement from November 2022. And what does it show? A transfer of $1,500 to what I thought was the mortgage company. But it wasn't the mortgage company, was it? No, the account had been changed. The mortgage was paid off in full 2 months earlier, but my payments kept going into an account controlled by my ex-wife. Did you authorize that change? No. Did anyone inform you the mortgage had been paid off? No. Karen let that sit for a moment, then continued. Mr. Cross, when did you first learn your marriage had been dissolved? Ethan's throat tightened. When I came home in October 2024. I walked into my house and found my wife with another man. He told me the divorce had been finalized months earlier. And how did you react? I was in shock. I checked my email. The service notifications were buried in my spam folder. I'd never seen them. Did you later discover those emails had been backdated? Yes. My friend Tariq, he's an IT specialist, ran a forensic analysis. The metadata didn't match the timestamps. The emails were sent months after the dates they claimed. Karen nodded. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Arnold Fisk stood for cross-examination, his expression sympathetic. Mr. Cross, I'm sorry for what you went through, truly. But let me ask you this. Did you ever, in 10 years, visit your wife in California? Ethan hesitated. No, I couldn't. My contract didn't allow extended leave. So for 10 years you were absent. Your wife was alone. I was working to support us. But she was alone, and during that time she met someone else, someone who was present. Is it possible, Mr. Cross, that your marriage simply ended naturally and you're looking for someone to blame? Ethan's voice hardened. My marriage ended because my wife and her attorney stole from me. That's not natural. That's criminal. Fisk raised his hands. No further questions. Ethan stepped down, his pulse still racing, and returned to his seat. Miles leaned over. You did great. I wanted to punch him. I know, but you didn't. That's what matters. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution called witness after witness. Marianne Chen described how she'd trusted Grant, how she'd believed the appraisal, how she'd only realized years later that she'd been cheated. David Kwan brought his spreadsheets, his emails, his meticulous records that proved the appraisal on his Los Gatos home had been a sham. One by one, 17 victims told their stories, and with each testimony, the jury's expressions grew harder. Then came the expert witnesses. A forensic accountant walked the jury through the money trail, showing how payments had been rerouted, how accounts had been concealed, how Grant's company had generated over $2 million in appraisal fees tied to cases where he was counsel of record. A digital forensics expert testified about the backdated emails, explaining in painstaking detail how the metadata had been altered and why it proved deliberate forgery. And then, on the 15th day of trial, the prosecution called Lauren Hale. The courtroom went silent as she walked to the stand. She looked smaller than Ethan remembered, her shoulders hunched, her eyes red-rimmed. She wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked like someone who'd spent months crying. Karen's voice was gentle but unyielding. Ms. Hale, how long were you married to Ethan Cross? 12 years. And when did you meet Grant Mercer? About 3 years ago. He was referred to me by a friend when I was considering divorce. What was your relationship with Mr. Mercer? Lauren's voice cracked. At first he was my attorney, but it became more. We started seeing each other. While he was still your attorney? Yes. Did Mr. Mercer ever discuss the appraisal of your marital home with you? Yes. He said it was being handled by his company, that it was standard. Did you question the valuation? No, I trusted him. Did Mr. Mercer ever tell you that your ex-husband's mortgage payments were still being deposited into your account after the mortgage had been satisfied? Lauren closed her eyes. Yes. What did he tell you? He said it was part of the settlement process, that it would be reconciled later. He told me not to worry about it. Did you believe him? I wanted to. I needed to believe someone cared about me. Karen's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. Ms. Hale, did you know those payments were fraudulent? Not at first, but later when I started seeing the news coverage, I went through the files. I realized what had been done, and I realized I'd been part of it. What did you do? I came forward. I gave Mr. Okoye the emails. I agreed to testify. Why? Lauren looked directly at Ethan for the first time since taking the stand, and her eyes were full of something he couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. Because it was the right thing to do, and because I owed Ethan the truth. Arnold Fisk's cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Hale, you received over $36,000 from Mr. Cross while knowing the mortgage had been paid off, correct? I didn't know at first, but you found out, and you kept the money. Yes. You kept it because you wanted it, because it made your life easier. I kept it because Grant told me to. But you made the choice. You chose to trust Grant over your husband. You chose to benefit from the fraud. Lauren's voice broke. I made a terrible mistake. I know that. A mistake that made you $60,000 richer when you sold the house, correct? I'm paying it all back, every cent. But you didn't offer to pay it back until you were caught, did you? Lauren didn't answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, and Ethan felt something inside him crack. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that she was paying a price too. When Lauren stepped down, the prosecution rested. The defense called only 3 witnesses, character witnesses who testified that Grant was a good man, a respected attorney, someone who'd made errors in judgment but wasn't a criminal. They were polite, sincere, and utterly unconvincing in the face of the mountain of evidence Karen had presented. Grant himself didn't testify. His attorneys advised against it, knowing that Karen would tear him apart on cross-examination. Closing arguments came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Karen stood before the jury one last time, her voice steady and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense wants you to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that Grant Mercer was just a man in love who made mistakes. But the evidence tells a different story. It tells the story of a man who saw an opportunity and exploited it, who used his law license as a weapon, who destroyed lives for profit and covered his tracks when he got caught. She walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. 17 people trusted him. 17 people believed the system would protect them. And 17 people were wrong. But you have the power to make it right. You have the power to say that trust matters, that the law matters, and that people like Grant Mercer don't get to cheat the system and walk away. She returned to her seat, and Arnold Fisk rose for the defense. His closing was emotional, pleading, focused on reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. But by the time he finished, the jury looked unmoved. Judge Ortiz gave the jury their instructions, and they filed out to deliberate. Ethan, Miles, and the other victims waited in the hallway, pacing, drinking bad coffee, checking their phones every 30 seconds. The hours dragged. 1 hour became 2, then 4, then 6. Finally, at 8:30 in the evening, the bailiff emerged. "We have a verdict." The courtroom filled quickly, the air thick with tension. The jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. Judge Ortiz took the bench. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." Ethan's breath caught. "On the charge of theft by false pretenses?" "Guilty." "On the charge of forgery?" "Guilty." One by one, 14 counts. 14 guilty verdicts. Grant's face went blank. Claudia Reyes closed her eyes. And in the gallery, Marianne Chen started crying. Judge Ortiz thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. Then he looked at Grant. "Mr. Mercer, bail is revoked. You'll be remanded into custody pending sentencing." 2 deputies moved forward, and Grant stood slowly, his hands shaking as they cuffed him. He was led out through a side door, and the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushing for their phones, victims embracing, attorneys shaking hands. Ethan just stood there, staring at the empty defense table, feeling the weight of 8 months lift off his shoulders. Miles appeared beside him. "How do you feel?" "Like I can finally breathe." "Good, because we're not done yet. Sentencing's in 6 weeks, and then we go after restitution." Ethan nodded. "Whatever it takes." Karen Phelps walked over, extending her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Cross, for your courage, for your testimony. This verdict belongs to all of you." Ethan shook her hand. "Thank you for believing us." She smiled. "That's my job." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the night air was cold and clean. Ethan stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by people he'd never met 8 months ago, but who now felt like family. Marianne hugged him. David shook his hand. Others just nodded, too emotional to speak. And for the first time since he'd stepped out of that taxi onto Maplewood Drive, Ethan Cross felt like he'd come home. Not to a house, to himself. 6 weeks felt like both an eternity and an instant. Ethan spent the time between the verdict and sentencing trying to build something that resembled a normal life. Though normal felt like a foreign language, he'd forgotten how to speak. The house on Maplewood Drive was his again, legally, officially, irrevocably. But it still didn't feel like home. It felt like a crime scene he was tasked with rehabilitating. He started small. Repainted the living room a warm gray that erased the stark white Lauren and Grant had chosen. Replaced the cold modern fixtures with something warmer, more human. He bought furniture from a local consignment shop, a couch that had seen better days but felt lived in, a dining table with scratches that told stories he'd never know. Piece by piece, He was erasing the life that had been built in his absence and replacing it with something that belonged to him. Miles called him every few days with updates. The DA's office was preparing a comprehensive restitution package that would force Grant to repay every victim, with interest. The state bar had formally disbarred him, effective immediately, and the criminal investigation had expanded. Prosecutors in 2 other counties had opened their own probes into cases where Grant had operated, suggesting the scope of his fraud was even larger than anyone had initially realized. We're estimating he defrauded victims out of somewhere between $3 and $4 million over 8 years, Miles said during one call. And that's just what we can prove. The real number's probably higher. Ethan sat on his new couch, staring at the ceiling. How does someone do that? How does someone hurt that many people and sleep at night? They convince themselves it's not hurting, that it's just business, that everyone does it. Miles paused. Or they just don't care. Which one was Grant? Both, probably, but it doesn't matter now. He's done. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early May, and Ethan arrived at the courthouse to find it more crowded than the verdict day had been. Every victim who could make the trip had come, along with reporters, legal observers, and even a few law students studying white-collar crime. The gallery was standing room only. Grant was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 weeks, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his shoulders slumped in permanent defeat. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at anyone. Judge Ortiz took the bench and wasted no time. We're here for sentencing in the matter of People versus Grant Mercer. Before I impose sentence, I'm going to hear from the victims. Miss Phelps, you may proceed. Karen stood. Your Honor, we have prepared victim impact statements from 14 individuals. With the court's permission, we'd like to present them. Granted. One by one, they came forward. Marianne Chen spoke first, her voice trembling but steady. She talked about the years she'd spent believing she was unlucky, that the divorce had just been hard, that the financial struggle afterward was her fault. She talked about the shame of needing food assistance, of moving into a smaller apartment, of explaining to her daughter why they couldn't afford things anymore. And she talked about the moment she'd learned the truth, that she hadn't been unlucky at all. She'd been stolen from. I trusted the system, Marianne said, her voice breaking. I trusted my attorney, and I was punished for that trust. I want Mr. Mercer to know that he didn't just take my money. He took my faith that people can be good. David Kwan spoke next, his engineer's precision turning his statement into a devastating itemization of loss. Not just the $125,000 he'd been cheated out of, but the opportunities that money would have created, his daughter's college fund, the business he'd wanted to start, the security he'd worked his entire life to build. I've spent 3 years angry, David said. Angry at myself for not seeing it. Angry at a system that let this happen, but mostly angry that someone with a law degree thought he could do this and get away with it. I hope the court sends a message that he can't. Others followed. A woman who'd lost her home and ended up living with her sister. A man who'd been forced to declare bankruptcy. A couple who'd delayed having children because they couldn't afford it, only to discover years later that they could have, if their divorce settlement hadn't been rigged. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. Trust betrayed, lives upended, futures stolen. When it was Ethan's turn, he walked to the podium and looked directly at Grant for the first time since the trial had ended. Grant's eyes were fixed on the table in front of him, but Ethan spoke anyway. Your Honor, I spent 10 years in Dubai. 10 years working 18-hour days in heat that could kill you if you weren't careful. 10 years away from everything I knew, everyone I loved. And I did it because I believed in something. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough, I could build a future for my wife and me. I believed the system would protect that sacrifice. He paused, his throat tight. Grant Mercer took that belief and turned it into a weapon. He didn't just steal my money. He stole a decade of my life. He stole my marriage. He stole my faith in the idea that doing the right thing matters. And when I came home and discovered what he'd done, he didn't apologize. He didn't try to make it right. He tried to cover it up. He forged evidence. He manipulated the system he'd sworn to uphold. And he did it all while sleeping in my bed and spending my money. Ethan's voice hardened. I don't want revenge, Your Honor. I want accountability. I want every person in this courtroom to know that what happened to us wasn't just bad luck or a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And I want to make sure it never happens to anyone else. He stepped down, and the courtroom was silent. Judge Ortiz looked at Grant. Mr. Mercer, do you wish to address the court? Grant's attorney, Arnold Fisk, stood. Your Honor, my client would like to make a statement. Grant rose slowly, his hands still cuffed, and cleared his throat. His voice was barely audible. I want to say I'm sorry. To everyone I hurt. I made terrible decisions. I let greed and ego cloud my judgment. I convinced myself that what I was doing was just aggressive representation, that I was helping my clients. But I see now that I was wrong. I destroyed lives. I betrayed the law. And I have to live with that. He paused, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might actually mean it. But then Grant continued. I hope the court will consider that I've cooperated with the investigation, that I've taken responsibility, that I'm not the monster people are making me out to be. Judge Ortiz's expression didn't change. Sit down, Mr. Mercer. Grant sat. The judge leaned back, his hands folded. Mr. Mercer, I've been on the bench for 30 years. I've sentenced murderers, thieves, abusers, and every kind of criminal in between. And I can tell you that very few of them think they're monsters. They all have justifications. They all have reasons. But the law doesn't care about reasons. It cares about actions. And your actions, Mr. Mercer, were calculated, systematic, and predatory. He opened the sentencing file. You didn't just commit fraud. You weaponized your position of trust. You turned the legal system into a tool for personal enrichment. And when you were caught, you didn't come clean. You obstructed justice. You forged evidence. You tried to destroy the people who had the courage to stand up to you. Judge Ortiz looked at Grant with something close to contempt. The presentence report recommends 8 to 12 years. The prosecution has asked for the maximum. And frankly, I'm inclined to agree. You didn't just break the law, Mr. Mercer. You broke the people who trusted you. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison. On the count of theft by false pretenses, 5 years to run consecutively. On the count of forgery, 3 years to run consecutively. On the count of obstruction of justice, 3 years to run consecutively. Total sentence, 16 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after serving 85%. The courtroom erupted. Grant's face went white. Arnold Fisk started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Furthermore, Judge Ortiz continued, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, totaling $3.2 million, plus interest and legal fees. Your assets, including your home, your vehicles, and any financial accounts, are to be liquidated and distributed to the victims according to a payment plan supervised by the court. You are also subject to a lifetime ban from practicing law in any jurisdiction. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. Grant was led away, his shoulders shaking, and the courtroom dissolved into chaos, reporters rushing for the exits, victims embracing, attorneys shaking hands. Ethan just stood there, watching Grant disappear through the door, and felt something inside him finally let go. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was just quiet. Miles clapped him on the shoulder. 16 years, that's a win, Ethan. Yeah, it is. Restitution's going to take time. They'll liquidate his assets first, but it'll be months before you see any money. I don't care about the money anymore, Ethan said. I just needed to know he couldn't do this to anyone else. Miles studied him. What are you going to do now? Ethan thought about it. I don't know. Figure out who I am without all this. That's a good place to start. Outside, the May sun was warm, the sky clear and blue. Marianne Chen found Ethan on the courthouse steps and hugged him tightly. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up. Thank you for trusting me, Ethan said. David Kwan shook his hand. This doesn't undo what happened, but it helps. Yeah, Ethan said, it helps. One by one, the victims dispersed, returning to their lives, their cities, their futures. And Ethan walked to his car, alone, but not lonely, and drove back to Maplewood Drive. The restitution process took 9 months. Grant's house sold for just over $1 million. His cars, his art collection, his investment accounts. All of it was liquidated and divided among the 17 victims according to a formula the court approved. Ethan received $42,000, enough to cover what he'd lost in the diverted payments, plus interest. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Lauren's portion of the restitution came separately. She'd sold the luxury furniture, the artwork, everything that had come from Grant, and sent Ethan a check for $63,000 with a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry. I hope this helps." Ethan stared at the check for a long time. Then he deposited it and wrote her back. Not a long letter, just a short one. "Lauren, I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will. But I don't hate you anymore either. I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. Ethan." He never heard back, and that was okay. In the months after sentencing, Ethan started to rebuild. Not just the house, but himself. He took a course in home inspection, drawn to the idea of helping people understand what they were really buying, of giving them the knowledge that could prevent them from being taken advantage of. The irony wasn't lost on him, a man who'd been blindsided by his own home, now teaching others to see clearly. The business grew faster than he expected. Word of mouth spread, especially among people who'd followed the case and respected what he'd been through. Within a year, he had more clients than he could handle, and hired 2 employees, a retired contractor named Joe, and a young woman fresh out of trade school named Aisha, who had a sharp eye and a sharper wit. He bought new tools, a better truck, business cards that didn't feel like lies. And slowly, the house on Maplewood Drive started to feel like home, not because it was beautiful or valuable, but because it was his, because he'd fought for it, because it represented something more than walls and a roof. It represented the idea that you could lose everything and still build something worth having. 2 years after the sentencing, Ethan got a call from Miles. "You sitting down?" Miles asked. "Should I be?" "Grant's up for parole." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Already? It's only been 2 years." He filed early due to overcrowding. The hearing's in 3 weeks. Victims have the right to submit statements. Ethan closed his eyes. "Do I have to?" "No. But it might help." "Help who?" "The parole board. The other victims. Maybe even you." Ethan thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "I'll do it." The parole hearing was held via video conference, and Ethan sat in Miles's office, staring at a screen that showed Grant Mercer in prison blues, looking older and smaller than Ethan remembered. The parole board reviewed his record, good behavior, participation in educational programs, expressions of remorse. Then they asked if any victims wanted to speak. Ethan unmuted his microphone. "My name is Ethan Cross. I was one of Mr. Mercer's victims." The board members nodded, waiting. 2 years ago, Mr. Mercer stood in court and said he was sorry. He said he'd made terrible decisions and that he wasn't a monster. And maybe he's not. Maybe he's just a man who made choices that hurt a lot of people. But here's the thing. Sorry doesn't give me back the decade I spent working in a foreign country believing I was building a future. Sorry doesn't undo the damage to the 17 families he defrauded. And sorry doesn't change the fact that when he was caught, his first instinct wasn't to make it right. It was to cover it up. Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know if Mr. Mercer has changed. I hope he has. But 2 years isn't enough time to prove it. Not for what he did. Not for how many lives he destroyed. I'm asking the board to deny parole and let him serve the sentence the court imposed." The board thanked him, and the hearing continued. Other victims spoke, some angrier, some more forgiving. And when it was over, the board deliberated for less than an hour. Parole denied. Grant would serve at least another 5 years. Ethan hung up the call and sat in silence. Miles handed him a glass of water. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Ethan said, "but okay." "You did the right thing." "I know, but it doesn't make me feel better." "It's not supposed to. It's just supposed to be right." 3 years later, Ethan was inspecting a house in Los Altos when he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Cross?" The voice was unfamiliar. Female? Professional? "Speaking." "My name is Jessica Arnett. I'm an attorney with the Victims Restitution Fund. I'm calling to inform you that the final distribution from the Mercer case has been processed. You should receive a check within 2 weeks. Ethan blinked. I thought restitution was finished years ago. There was a final asset recovery, a retirement account Mr. Mercer had concealed. It took us 3 years to find it, but we did. Your share is $18,000. Ethan sat down on the front steps of the house he was inspecting. I wasn't expecting that. Most victims aren't, but the fund is committed to recovering every dollar we can. You should be proud, Mr. Cross. Your testimony was instrumental in making this case what it was. Thank you, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure what he was thanking her for. When the check arrived, Ethan stared at it for a long time. $18,000. Money he'd never expected. Money that represented the very last piece of Grant Mercer's dismantled empire. He thought about keeping it, putting it toward this business, maybe, or saving it for something he didn't know he needed yet. But then he thought about Marianne Chen, struggling to pay for her daughter's college. About David Kwan, who'd lost more than anyone. About all the people who'd been hurt and were still rebuilding. And he made a decision. He called Miles. I want to set up a fund for victims of attorney fraud who can't afford to fight back. People like us, but without the resources to hire someone like you. Miles was quiet for a moment. You're serious? Completely. I want to use the restitution money to seed it, and I want to raise more. Enough to make a difference. That's a hell of an idea, Ethan. Can you help me set it up? Absolutely. 6 months later, the Cross Advocacy Fund was official, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal support for victims of professional fraud. It started small, just Ethan's $18,000 and a few donations from people who'd followed the case. But word spread. Legal blogs picked it up. Victim advocacy groups promoted it. And within a year, the fund had grown to over $200,000 and had helped a dozen people fight back against attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors who'd betrayed their trust. Ethan didn't run it full time. He still had his inspection business, still loved the work of helping people see clearly. But he sat on the board, reviewed applications, and every few months he'd get a letter from someone the fund had helped. Those letters meant more to him than any verdict ever could. 5 years after the sentencing, Ethan was having coffee at a small shop in Palo Alto when he saw her. Lauren. She was sitting by the window reading a book, and she looked different, lighter somehow. Her hair was shorter, her face more relaxed. She glanced up, saw him, and froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lauren stood and walked over. Ethan. Lauren. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me. Ethan gestured to the empty chair across from him. Sit. She did, nervously, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. I saw the article about the fund. What you're doing is amazing. It's not about me. It's about making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other people. Still, it's more than I ever did. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. I got remarried, Lauren said finally. His name is Michael. He's a teacher. We met at a community college where I was taking classes. I'm happy for you, Ethan said, and he meant it. I wanted to reach out so many times, to apologize again, to explain. But I didn't think you'd want to hear it. I wouldn't have, not for a long time. And now? Ethan thought about it. Now I just want you to be okay. I don't need an apology, Lauren. I just need to know you learned something. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. I did. I learned that trust isn't something you give blindly, that love doesn't mean ignoring your gut, and that sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. It is. They talked for another 20 minutes, carefully, tentatively, like two people navigating a minefield. She told him about her life, her marriage, the work she was doing at a nonprofit helping women rebuild after divorce. He told her about the business, the fund, the life he'd built from the wreckage. When they finally stood to leave, Lauren hugged him. Thank you, Ethan, for not hating me forever. I never hated you, Ethan said. I just hated what happened. Me too. She walked away, and Ethan watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that came from winning or from revenge or from proving a point. The kind that came from letting go. 7 years after he'd first walked into his house and found his life in ruins, Ethan Cross stood in the backyard of 428 Maplewood Drive, watching the sun set over the hills. The house was finally, truly his. The business was thriving, the fund was helping people, and he was happy. Not the way he'd imagined happiness when he was 25 and planning a future with Lauren. Not the way he'd imagined it when he was working brutal hours in Dubai, believing sacrifice would pay off, but happy in a way that was real, in a way that was earned. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Nina Parker, the nurse he'd been dating for the past 6 months. She handed him a glass of wine and leaned against the railing beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Ethan said, and he realized he meant it. "I'm good." "Thinking about everything?" "A little, but mostly just thinking about how far I've come." Nina smiled. "You've come pretty far." "So have you." She worked 60-hour weeks at a trauma center, saved lives, came home exhausted, and still found time to laugh, to care, to be present. She was nothing like Lauren, and that was exactly what Ethan needed. They stood together in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple, and Ethan felt something settle inside him. Not closure. That word always felt too clean, too final. But something close. A sense that the worst was over and the best was still ahead. Grant Mercer would serve another decade in prison. The victims had their restitution. The system had been exposed and slowly was changing. And Ethan Cross had his life back. Not the life he'd planned, but the life he'd fought for. And in the end, that made all the difference.